I don't think by accident, because when by accident you can face one patient or one person who will come, okay? When you see many persons, okay, or 7 to 10 persons together comes to the hospital, all was shooted. I think this is not accident.
I'm Palestinian, was born in Amman, Jordan. She was subjected to a strip search. Really, they put her in a room, separate from anybody else, from anything else, for hours. They searched her, like every inch of her body. She told me that she was, the minute they left her alone, her tears were just coming down her cheeks.
I studied in the United States for college and for graduate school. Was that we had to renew our identity documents and our permits, and if we didn't, they would expire and we would lose our right to return to our home. Now, every memory I have associated with that trip was one of absolute misery, and the policy or practice that stands out the most in my mind was this one of strip searching.
I am a Palestinian American attorney. I live in Portland, Oregon. We were separated, and I was asked to go with a uniformed officer, and she asked me to undress. And I must have hesitated because she asked me again, and having grown up in a Christian family in Nazareth, I was quite modest. She took off my top, I helped to take off my pants, and didn't really say much of anything, and she had me turn around. She felt my legs, my behind. So there I was as a 10-year-old in this little room, just about completely naked, and knew that I could not challenge what was happening. And I just complied. It just feels, sitting here as an adult, that as a child I really shouldn't have had to go through that.
I was born in Englewood, New Jersey, and I was raised in Cliffside Park, New Jersey, which is where I still live. It's a 1 square mile town, 10 minutes out of Manhattan. I was student council president, editor of my yearbook. I remember being 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 being strip searched. I remember being really little and being strip searched and having them have me take off my pantyhose, and because I had cerebral palsy, not being able to put the pantyhose back on.
I remember I was about maybe 12 and, you know, feeling uncomfortable, having to remove my shirt and, or my undershirt, because she had said, you can't keep your undershirt on, you have to also remove that. And I remember thinking, you know, how audacious it was at the time. For what purpose could it, you know, serve for me to remove my undershirt other than to embarrass me, you know? And I was crying and pleading with my mother to ask her.
I'm a stand-up comic. As soon as security saw my name, they flagged me. Then they took me to strip search me. I said, well, listen, I need a maxi pad right now. One of the Israeli security females, when they confiscated my stuff and wouldn't give me a maxi pad, started crying. And she had her security tag like taken off of her neck, and she was sent away. There's nothing more horrifying or embarrassing you can do to a woman than have her sit there and bleed all over herself. I said, will you at least admit that you're doing this to me because I'm of Arab descent? And she said, yes. It made me feel like they're above the law. There's nothing they can't do. If they've gotten to the point where they cannot give a girl in a wheelchair her maxi pad, there's really nothing that's sacred. There's nothing that's holy. There's nothing that's safe. There were several women, including the woman who was pushing my wheelchair, none of whom said a word. No one spoke up. No one. No one. No one spoke up. So now I'm embarking on a 12-hour flight in first class, covered in blood, and I get in and the flight attendant just looks at me like with such disgust. As a disabled person, I just felt like it was my worst fear come true, the idea of not being able to take care of myself and just being a mess. I try not to think of being over London and just feeling like I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it.
I remember my mother being next to me and being told that she had to remove her pad. I didn't understand it, and I just thought, why? You know, you had to kind of submit because they were occupiers and they had the machine guns with them, and we didn't. And so you had to be quiet. You couldn't really say much or argue.
The last time I saw my parents, I was 14, and they sent me on a children's transport, a kinder transport to England. And by sending me there, they literally gave life to me a second time. In 1981, I went back to the camps where my parents had been. The last camp was Auschwitz. When I stood on the spot where the cattle cars arrived and the selection was made, although there's nothing there that could possibly remind me of my parents, that's when I finally accepted there's no way that they survived or that other family members survived. Typed my name in the computer, and instantly, like growing out of the floor, were two men who identified themselves as security. Their name tags were turned around. I was wanded and patted down, and then I was told to get undressed. And I said, "You have no right to do this." So I got undressed, and then I was told to bend over, and I was internally searched. And I said, "Why are you doing this?" They said, "Because you're a terrorist, because you're a security risk." I have never in my whole life been so angry.
I've never been so embarrassed in my life.
Why would you go to such lengths to humiliate someone? This was something done purely to humiliate and for no other purpose. I think that was part of the policy. It was intentional. It was meant to make Palestinians detest going back.
Teaching us Palestinians a lesson. Don't come back.
It's intimidation, and that's what they try to do so that we don't report back what we really see. Well, if they don't want the United States or the world to know, then don't do it.
When I landed in the U.S., I called my friends in Palestine, and the first thing I said to them is, "I'm never coming back."
I hadn't been back home since I was 10 years old. One of the reasons it is difficult for me to think about going back home to Nazareth is that the thought of being placed in that same position I was in as a 10-year-old and not being able to do anything about it is too much for me.
There are these magazines in the back seat. On every page in every one of these magazines, and in the magazines that were where my friend was sitting, I wrote, "I'm a Holocaust survivor. I will never, ever come back to Israel."
That's what they want. They want us to get to the point where we don't go back.
I saw Mohammed being shot. It was on the 17th of October. There were 3 jeeps that had gone into the camp.
They have at least 6 portholes where they can shoot out from, and their jeeps are completely armed, manned, every porthole.
They'd only been there about, say, 15 minutes. They'd gone down one end of the camp and then turned round to come back. And then 2 of the jeeps left because they weren't interested in anything going on there. But one of the jeeps decided to stay.
But as usual, one jeep stopped for whatever reason.
And I saw one of the soldiers putting his gun out of the porthole at the back of the jeep. And it seems to be something like 4 or 5 minutes where he was aiming at a group of people at the side and one of them was Mohammed. I could see him walking up and down, and I was really worried for his safety. And I remember we shouted out to the soldiers, look, don't shoot, there's just a small child there, you don't need to do this.
We were screaming, don't shoot the entire time. We kept hollering that.
And then a few seconds later, bang. And they'd hit Mohammed, and I heard him screaming and holding onto his stomach and going into the ambulance. And then the Jeep just drove away.
And he was shot, we found out he was shot in the stomach. And it was a rubber bullet, but it penetrated, and he went through one surgery, and he was supposed to go through another in Rafidia Hospital. And that's a place where, they usually only keep people if it's very serious conditions, because they only have, I think, 25 beds and very few in ICU. So it was obviously pretty serious for them to keep him for as long as they did.
Rubber bullet is metal, some metallic cylindric metal, okay, which covered by cylindric rubber, okay, penetrate the abdominal wall, and getting into the abdomen, okay, causing an injury to the sac that's collection of urine. He needs 2 weeks treatment here.
So he required an operation on the bladder?
Yes,
also?
yes. He was underwent a laparotomy operation, and the rubber bullet was removed from intra-abdominal remove, and he's now in the stage of recovery after operation.
But it was so shocking because all of this happened in the space of 15 to 20 minutes. The soldiers didn't seem to be doing anything in the camp. If they wanted anything with Mohammed, they could have got out of their jeep and gone and spoke to them or arrested him. It was nothing to do with that. It seemed to be pure malice.
So we were trying to follow up with that story. And we had one of the activists contact one of the pressmen there from AP, and he said he would keep the footage, or she asked him to, because we were trying to follow up with human rights organizations. She called him back a few days later after we were getting the story organized. Somehow he doesn't have it, and he doesn't know, either he doesn't know who has it or it doesn't exist anymore. We're still trying to follow up on what happened.
So AP had footage of a soldier deliberately shooting a child in the stomach.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they get that a lot. It's not something that's surprising. It doesn't surprise me that it doesn't make it into the news most of the time. It's most of the time that they invade the camp, they don't leave until someone's shot.
هاي الولد هاي سلم
Are these being shot by accident? Are they snipers? Do you have an opinion?
I don't think they're by accident, because if by accident you can face one patient or one person who will come, okay? When you see many persons, okay, or 7 to 10 persons together comes to the hospital, all was shot. I think this is not an accident.
Jeffrey Goldberg is one of the media's Middle East experts. He is a staff writer for The New Yorker, has worked for the New York Times Magazine and The Washington Post. He frequently appears on PBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, and NPR news shows. In 2006, he wrote a review of former President Jimmy Carter's book about Israel-Palestine. Carter has spent decades working for Mideast peace. In 2002, he received the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to bring peaceful solutions to international conflicts. In his book, Carter assigns primary blame for the continuing violence in the Middle East to Israeli leaders. In his Washington Post review, Goldberg slams the book mercilessly. He terms it anti-historical and calls Carter cynical. Goldberg's extremely negative 1,600-word review is featured prominently and in its entirety on Amazon.com's product overview of the book. What the Washington Post and Amazon neglect to tell readers is that Goldberg is hardly a neutral reviewer.
I believe from a very early age in Zionism in a very, very personal way.
After college, Goldberg emigrated to Israel, took Israeli citizenship, joined the Israeli army, and served at Israel's notorious concentration camp, Ketziot. A Palestinian Christian leader describes what it was like to be a prisoner at Ketziot.
They feed you when they feel like to. They give you water when they feel like to. And you know, they could shoot at you from the towers, from the soldier tower, if they suspect anything is going wrong. It's like being exposed to death 24 hours a day. In fact, I remember this incident like upon arrival to Ketziot, the camp administration was trying to force prisoners to build more sections, and prisoners refused. So the army, the detention center commander came in after all detainees were standing in rows and started shouting at us, and then he said, "Who is the man among you?" I think in Hebrew. And, you know, two persons stepped to say, "Yes, what do you want? If you want to talk it, we can talk it." And he immediately grabbed the gun from the hand of the soldier and shot them dead.
In an interview in The New Yorker, Jeffrey Goldberg described what it was like to work as a guard at Ketziot.
In the year 2000, an uprising began in Palestine. Like most Americans, Allison Weir, the editor of a small-town newspaper in California, knew very little about the conflict, other than what she had gleaned from the evening news or newspaper headlines. Neither a Muslim nor a Jew, she nevertheless became more curious about the topic of the Palestinian uprising. And as she researched it, she became increasingly suspicious that the American media were not telling us the whole story. Months later, she traveled to the occupied territories as an independent journalist to find out for herself what the U.S. media seemed to be omitting. 3 months after returning from Palestine, Allison Weir quit her job and founded If Americans Knew, an organization dedicated to quantifying the ways in which the American media was misinforming the public about the conflict.
We decided to really look into the news coverage of Israel and Palestine analytically and statistically to really understand what is going on. And we decided to choose clear, objective categories that would be as immune as possible to subjective interpretation. And we decided to look at how deaths were being covered by our media. Now, the important thing is that we looked at how deaths were being covered among both populations, Israelis and Palestinians. We specifically studied the New York Times and the three major networks. We looked at ABC, CBS, and NBC, their evening primetime news shows. Now, to do this study, the first job was a very sad job, to discover how many people had been killed during those 2 years, how many Israelis and how many Palestinians. And to learn that fact, we went to an Israeli human rights organization, B'Tselem, which is very respected and quite careful in its gathering of data. Palestinians were being killed last year by a rate of 8-to-1 over Israeli deaths. Now, keeping those numbers in line, we then looked at what the New York Times had reported and what these major networks had reported. For example, we found that ABC had covered Israeli deaths at a rate 3.1 times greater than Palestinian deaths. We discovered that CBS had covered Israeli deaths at a rate almost 4 times greater, 3.8-to-1. We discovered that NBC covered Israeli deaths at a rate 4 times greater than Palestinian deaths. Mainly what we discovered was omission. And of course, we all know the most effective lying is lying through omission, because no one even knows what's missing. Perhaps the most significant omission in our media's reporting is our own connection to this conflict. The amount of American tax money to Israel is approximately $15 million per day. We give them more than we give to all of sub-Saharan Africa put together. Americans can and should draw their own conclusions, but they cannot draw informed conclusions without having full, unbiased information. And we're not getting that yet. We won't get that until we all demand it.
To watch more documentaries and interviews about the Middle East, visit the Alternate Focus website, alternatefocus.org. Watch the video of the week right from the homepage. Or click on the link under Watch Our Shows online. Look through our catalog of programs, select the one you want to see, and watch it for free. alternatefocus.org.